You think you're real slick, Marvel, don't you? It's like they don't even care anymore. They just nonchalantly just... Ugh. Not today. No. Marvel. Not today. What's up, guys? Once again, our Disney overlords have graced us with another episode of Hawkeye, and as per usual, they never like references or comparisons to the comics, so let's get into it. Before we get started, if you're already subscribed, don't forget to hit the bell next to the subscribe button so you get notified every time I put out new videos. And if you're not subscribed, well, come on. We have fun. So the episode starts out with showing us Maya in 2007 attending a school, and she's having a hard time reading people's lips. She goes to her dad asking him why he didn't send her to that special school for deaf children, but he encourages her that she needs to learn to adapt to her surroundings. After her dad gives her those words of encouragement, we see him taking her to a karate class, where if you notice he's wearing a tracksuit, so her dad in the show is working for the tracksuit mafia. As the dad is leaving because he has to go do his job. Would you consider killing people a job? Anyway, as he's going to do his job, you end up seeing Maya smiling at somebody, and this person is wearing a big suit, and he's a really big guy, and he just puts his hand on her and just, like, we know who that is. Like, we know who that is. But anyway, then during the karate class, we see hints of Maya developing her photographic memory that she has in the comics. We cut to Maya a little bit older, heading to her dad's auto repair shop called Fat Man Auto Repair. Really, Marvel? Fat Man, could you guys not make this more obvious? Anyway, she walks into the auto repair shop finding that our friend Ronin is taking down the entire mafia. And one of those people that he ends up taking down just so happens to be Maya's dad. As Maya's dad is dying, he puts his hand on her face, leaving a bloody handprint, which is reminiscent to something that her dad actually did in the comics. Now, as for her dad, in the show, he's called William Lopez, but in the comic books, he's called Willie Crazy Horse Lincoln, and he is a henchman for Kingpin, but he doesn't work for the Tracksuit Mafia. Now, one thing they did differently is that it wasn't Ronin that killed him, it was actually Kingpin who ordered to have him killed. Willie's last request was for Kingpin to raise Maya, and Kingpin respected that and raised her as his adopted daughter. Instead of telling her who really killed her father, Kingpin convinced her that Daredevil killed her father. But I don't think in the show they're really going to get into that. Then the episode takes us back where episode 2 left off. We see Kate and Clint tied up on these mechanical horses, and it seems like the tracksuit's having a pretty good time making fun of them. When Maya comes down to interrogate, she notices that Clint has a hearing aid, so it seems for a moment she kind of sympathizes with him because of the fact she's actually deaf. But it shows that Clint isn't fully there with the sign language since his hearing isn't completely gone yet. He's just losing it slowly. And because of that, she ties him back up, which, dang, you sympathize with him when you think he can't hear you, but when you realize that he still has a little bit of his hearing, you're just like, all right, time to tie you back up again. So Clint, obviously being more experienced, was able to get untied and starts fighting against Maya. During the fight, she ends up destroying his hearing aid because earlier she had mentioned that he relies too much in technology, which I think later on in the show that'll come back to play in some way. While they're trying to escape, Kate runs into a 1970 Dodge Challenger and she wants to take it, but Clint is reluctant because he doesn't want to destroy such a nice car, which it's a very nice car. And that car is a reference to the car in the comics named Cherry. So while they're escaping, Kate gets to see the entire arsenal of arrows that Hawkeye has. During the entire chase scene, she's trying to communicate with Clint to see which arrow is more useful, but since his hearing aid is destroyed, he can't hear anything. So they end up showing Kate shooting a putty arrow. I think that's what it is. She ends up accidentally shooting them with an explosive arrow, and she uses another arrow that starts just grabbing trees and throwing it in front of the car, which I don't have a name for that arrow. And then when they reach the bridge, Clint tells her to aim her arrow up in the air, while he has another arrow that is actually an arrow that was given to him by Hank Pym. So Clint gives her the signal to shoot her arrow, and then he shoots the Hank Pym arrow, and then it just enlarges and destroys that entire truck. I'm surprised those guys aren't dead. That should have killed them. But they are able to escape, both of them ending up in a train in the subway. And you kind of get a moment where you see that Clint really does recognize that she is a good archer. We then get this really, really heart-wrenching scene with Clint, where his son Nathaniel calls him, and he thinks it's his daughter, but then Kate lets him know through a notebook that it's actually his son Nathaniel. And this scene, I'm not gonna lie, this scene actually had me tearing up a little bit, because it was just hard to see him trying to talk to his son and him not being able to hear him. It was hard to see Clint so vulnerable, because you've always seen Clint as being the one who's prepared, who's tough, but it seemed like he was not prepared for this. He was not prepared for the situation of losing his hearing and not being able to communicate with his kids. And so his son tells him that it's okay if he's not able to make it to Christmas. And it's very heart-wrenching, because his children understand what he does. His kids know that he's Hawkeye. He understands that he's an Avenger. But it still makes it hard that he has to give up time with his family to fix the mistakes that he had left when they were gone. But it was sweet that Kate was helping him communicate back and forth the conversation with his son. So then we go back to the Tracksuit Mafia, where they have to relocate since their location has been compromised. We see Kazi talk to Maya, letting her know that she's a little bit out of control and is risking the lives of some of their men. He starts mentioning somebody named Uncle, and they don't know how Uncle's going to feel about this, which again... But Maya asserts that she's the one in charge and things are going to be done the way she wants them to be done, so... hopefully she gets attention to whatever uncle this is. So we go to Clint and Kate walking down the park explaining who the Mafia is. He explains that the Mafia started really, really small, and once they got to a really, really high point, Ronin got involved and started killing off all the members. One person that he mentions that Kate shouldn't mess with is Uncle, which is who Kazi and Maya were talking about earlier. Again, I do think that Uncle is Kingpin. I'm gonna layer that on thick, because I feel like he's gonna be in this show. But then again, everybody thought Mephisto was gonna be in WandaVision, and they could not have been more wrong. But real quick, I think it's cool what the show did in that scene with his son. It was heartbreaking, but it was very cool to see how he couldn't hear the outside world. He couldn't hear anything that was going on outside of him, but he can hear his own voice. It's kind of like when you talk, your ears are blocked, but you know what you sound like. So it was, I don't know how to really explain it. I just think it's very cool how they were able to, you hear his voice, but everything else is muffled. Everything else going on is muffled, and it makes the scene more heart-wrenching, because he knows what he's saying, but he can't hear what his son is saying. I wanted to add that as an extra thing. I think it's very cool how they did that. Then we go to Clint and Kate at a diner, where they were able to get his hearing aid repaired. Kate starts talking about the fact that his problem is branding, so she starts drawing an idea for a costume, and that idea for a costume is obviously the actual comic book version of Hawkeye's costume, the giant like eye things, and then like the letter H like up here for. But he explains to her that he isn't a role model to be needing to wear all those flashy colors. Even though he's failing to realize that Kate is literally someone that looks up to Clint. But he explains to her that this life that she's wanting to live, this superhero life, comes with a cost. That cost being losing friends, the same way Clint lost Natasha, or the same way Clint lost his family during the snap in Endgame and in Infinity War. So then we see Kate trying to give the name to the dog, and she goes, you know where she's headed, because we know the name is Lucky the Pizza Dog, but she starts giving like these subtle little like nicknames, and then says, how about Pizza Dog? And it's like, yeah, that was going to be his name anyway. So Kate continues to be very, very suspicious of her mom's boyfriend, Jack. So they both decide to sneak into her mom's house to see if her security system can get a little more information to see if Jack is actually involved with the Tracksuit Mafia. They end up going through her mom's security website to find Kazi, seeing that Kazi works for a company known as Sloan Limited, which that might be a reference to something, but I don't know yet what that is. Now, in case you guys did not know this, Kazi actually has a significant part in Hawkeye's hearing problem. The reason I say Kazi is involved with Hawkeye is because in the comics, he's known as an assassin called the Clown. And this clown just so happened to grab 2 of Hawkeye's arrows and stab his ears. I don't know if the show's going to go that route, but I will say that I would not know how to react to that if they do that. The show ends with a cliffhanger showing Clint trying to walk around the house because he hears a suspicious noise, to then have the Ronin sword up at his throat, and at the end of that sword is our good old buddy Jack. And oddly enough, Jack knows Hawkeye in the comics because Jack is actually Hawkeye's mentor. I don't know if the show's going to go that route, and if they do, it'd be really, really cool to dig deep into that situation since we don't really know much about Hawkeye's background in the series or MCU in total. But that's it for Hawkeye Episode 3. I really, really think that Episode 1 and 2 were a good introduction to the story that's going to be unfolding throughout the next few weeks. But after this episode, I'm really, really excited to see what they start doing because this one had a lot more action, so it kind of gets you excited to what the action is going to be like the rest of the show. And of course, the thing that I've been laying on thick is that they give a very, very, very subtle nod to someone possibly or not possibly being in this show. I mean, for God's sake, there's an auto repair shop called Fat Man Auto Repair. That might be a reference to something else, but he's literally been called that in the comics before. So it would make sense. I'm going off about it, but I think he's going to be in the show. He is heavily involved in the comic. There's no way I'm going off. I'm ranting too much. But I do want to see how they dig into Clint's hearing loss because that does play a big part in his life in the comics. And I want to see how Maya's really involved in this. I think Maya's going to be like the main villain, so to speak. But for all I know, the Clown is actually the main villain, and the Clown meaning Kazi. He could be the one who actually becomes the huge problem. And right now, he's just a lower level until he eventually, moves up. Well, that's it for today, guys. If there's anything I missed, any Easter eggs or references I missed, please leave a comment down below. If you like this video, guys, please don't forget to give it a thumbs up and subscribe so you guys don't miss anything. But until next time, thank you so much. My name is Damien, and this has been Filmsplaining. See you soon.